Ahana, thanks so much for joining me today. Um, Thank you for your time. I'm hoping we get into it. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Perfect. Let's jump straight into it. Take me back to your childhood. What did you want to be when you were a child?
Not to sound like every other child, but I actually wanted to be an astronaut. And I say actually because I feel like I did have a legitimate plan to getting there. Um, when I think it was probably in primary school when I lived in the UK. I lived in North Wales, which is a very scenic place. And so I remember I used to just sit on my windowsill and look up at the stars. And at the time, I couldn't quite articulate why I was so fascinated, but I just love trying to understand like how this massively vast thing, which I realized was the universe, worked. And so I always had this curiosity for just how things around us work. But then when I was 14, we moved to India. So that was a pretty stark difference from North Wales to New Delhi. Um, and, I think at that, I was fortunate enough to be old enough to sort of appreciate the experience, but also young enough that I was still very much shaped by it. These were my formative years. And I think what those 2 years in Delhi did was really just give me a sense of appreciation for the life that I have led, for the opportunities that I had, for the education I'd received, for the family support that I had. I think it just put a lot of life into perspective. Um, and from that point, it was, in particular, the education that I've had has been so great and I have so much support. I need to do something useful for this world with my education. And then when I was 16, we moved to Singapore. And the school I went to actually had an astronaut as one of the alumni. It was a very fancy school. Um, and I just remember meeting him was, there are very few points in life where you meet one person and it just like has such a lasting impact on you. But that really was one. I just remember he was giving a talk to the school and every question he answered, like every word he said, I just was like trying to absorb. And, it resonated so much with me and the way he thought, I just found so inspirational and aspirational. Um, and I also thought, given my interest in physics, like I love physics, I love maths at school, I also was really interested in philosophy and again, just this understanding of how the world works and how to perceive different things in life. My career plan was to study physics at uni, to like worm my way into working as a scientist at the European Space Agency. And then I'd have like 10 years of working, and most astronauts are in their 30s anyway. So I'd like weasel my way in, like network as much as I could at the European Space Agency and try and get selected for a 2030 mission. And that really was my career plan to the extent that when I got to uni, my personal tutor actually did work at the European Space Agency and I like shared this like career plan with him. So it wasn't like like I want to be an astronaut. It was like I actually want to be an astronaut and I'm going to try and make some decisions that will get me there.
And you had the whole plan carried out. I love that. That is awesome.
And the great thing is there's still time. It's still not 2030. So we'll see.
You can definitely get on that Mars program that's coming up, right?
Fingers crossed, fingers
Fingers
crossed.
crossed. Okay, given those teenage years and you wanting to be an astronaut, right? Switching gears slightly, did you have any entrepreneurial interests? And if so, were any of them kind of geared towards making money? Or was it a complete focus on, I want to be an astronaut?
It was really the latter. It was just a focus on being an astronaut. I've come to realize I am more of an all or nothing kind of person, but within that, the things I'm interested in tend to be quite broad. So being an astronaut isn't one single thing. It's being someone that loves to work with people from all around the world. It means you love doing scientific experiments. It means you're adventurous. So it's quite a broad role in itself. And I think I've always had that breadth of interests, but targeted towards different career paths. So no, growing up, I was very much set on science, on academia, and then on space and astrophysics. Um, and interestingly, my dad has always been in business, and I would never talk careers with him. I had no interest in what he did. I didn't really understand what he did. Um, it just wasn't something that I thought about or had any interest in. But what I really appreciate about the way that my parents raised my brother and I was I really feel like they equipped us with all of the tools to make our own decisions at the end of the day. So they, you know, made sure we studied and gave us the best education that they could, but they never once told us you should do this or you should do that. It was always an open conversation about what do you want to do and why do you want to do it? And okay, if you want to do this, what's your plan to getting there? And so, you know, when I started uni, as I said, the plan was still ESA, find my way in, become an astronaut. But it was really, you know, very early on in my university experience where I just didn't enjoy the degree I was doing. And I think there were various reasons for that. The biggest one is that I think the British university system is very single focused. And as I mentioned, I've always had a much broader range of interests. And I just didn't like doing only maths and physics all day long. I felt like all of my other interests, all of my other skills weren't getting used. And I also, just from like a sort of community and belonging perspective, it was no longer, you know, I wasn't viewing the people around me as aspirational. There were many things that I actually couldn't see in myself that I saw in them, and things that I wasn't aspiring to have. And so it was actually a bit of a crisis at the time, because I have always been, I think, quite a career focused person. That focus has shifted for sure over the years, but I've always felt that career and how I spend my time on this planet is important to me. So I made it my mission as an 18-year-old. I said, well, if I'm not going to be a physicist or an astronaut, I have to figure out what I'm going to do and what I'm going to add to this world in some way positive. And it is really interesting that I ended up in entrepreneurship, not from an innate sort of like personal perspective. I actually met with one of my high school friends last week. I hadn't seen her in 5 years, and it was a really sweet thing of her to say. But she said, it never surprised me that you've ended up becoming an entrepreneur. And I said, even though like I was so like keen on physics, she said, no, because you've always just had a very different way of thinking of things. All of the smart kids in our school just were sort of like trying to get the top grades to go to a top uni, and that's where the plan ended. But you'd always thought about that next step, and you were always good and interested in a broad range of things, which you need to be an entrepreneur. And when I look at it from that perspective, I mean, it was a lovely compliment to be told, but I think that she was right to an extent, that I have always had sort of that part. But the part that I wouldn't say that I am or that I have been is money minded, which is probably not what my investors want to hear. But I think there really is a shift with our generation around entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship for good as well. On the one hand, you know, the world, we live in a capitalistic society. Money does matter. And I say this having gone to a regular state school and then also seeing wealth on the other extreme at these very privileged international schools. So I'm fully aware of the role money plays in this world and what money can do. But I also believe that, you know, there are other things in life that are important, and money at the cost of social bad or environmental bad is not worth it. And that's something that I feel quite strongly about. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, I feel that having the power to have those values present in your own company and the way that you do your work is quite important to me. I think you can make money, and because again, to get funding, to get investors to say yes, you have to have a plan, you have to prove that you can. But I think for me, it's the impact that drives me much more than the money. If the money drove me, I'd have taken my banking job. I wouldn't be doing this.
No, that's very true, right? Yeah, investment bankers are incredibly well paid, and it's part of the job. It's the risk that they take on and the way that the banks operate. But if we're taught in our lives that we have to love what we do, and that it needs to be a central passion for our lives, do you agree with that, given that ultimately your parents have brought you up in this way and they've said to you, it's not about the grade, it's about the why?
I would actually say, so my parents didn't say that. They said that it is about the grades, and
it is about the grades.
And here's why. So, and I really do appreciate that, because the way I see it is they made sure that I studied hard in school, and they only had to when I was young. I was always quite disciplined and intrinsically motivated. But I think, again, what they didn't articulate in these exact terms, but the way I've interpreted it now is that they got me to the point where I had the choices available to me. And I had those choices because I studied hard at school. It meant that when I finished school, I was 18, I could make my own decisions. If I wanted to be an astronaut, I could do it. If I wanted to be a rock star, I could do it. If I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I could do it. But they never said which one of those paths to pursue, but instead get yourself in a position where you have those options available to you. And I think that was something that now when I look at young kids, or, I remember like, oh, why do I have to do this homework? Like if I was throwing an attitude, I think that the extra effort that you put into school and education, especially, pre-university, just studying hard will get you a long way as far as the choices it gives you at the age of 18. And I think that's where I'm really grateful for the way that my parents raised me.
I think that showing up and just doing the work is like half the job, right? It's all, to be perfectly honest, it's like 90% of it. You show up, you do the work, and that 10% is making a decision on what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And given that we're transitioning to that, that's a hell of a segue. I'd love to get into startup life, founder life, for a little bit. Do you think it's important for startups to be located in the Valley?
I hope not, because I'm over here in Oxford. So, I'm a huge proponent of remote working. And it's something that I have to be honest, I'm open to have my mind changed on. It's not something that, I'm going to go and fight for remote working, but we have been remote from day one. We continue to operate fully remotely. And there are many companies that I admire that also have always been fully remote. But I do think that how, it all comes down to company values and what works, what you want to do with your company and how your people want to do it. And I do think that remote working isn't for everyone. And I'm fortunate to be the one making the hiring decisions where I screen for that. And if I don't think someone is values aligned with remote working, then no matter how great they are, they're not a fit for our values at our company. On the flip side, it's also difficult for me to say, not having gone to San Francisco during my entire duration of being a founder, because I also don't know what it would have been like had I gone over there. And I do have to hold my hands up and say that. But when I look more objectively at the decisions I've made, at the things that have happened, I feel I've, if anything, been able to get more work done working remotely. But then on the flip side, a huge part of one's life and career are these very serendipitous moments, or these big turning points. And for me, some of those turning points were, applying to Y Combinator. I never in a million years expected that it would work out, but it did. Or, meeting one person, meeting the astronaut at that time that really set what my vision was for that period of my life. And so the serendipity is very difficult to predict. And that's the thing that's missing. And I cannot say what would have happened or what wouldn't have happened had I been in San Francisco for all this time, but that is out of my control. So what is it within my control, which is how I spend my 24 hours in a day, what I'm doing, working. A lot of that can be done, I think, a lot more efficiently when you are working remotely. But who knows, maybe I'm yet to experience the magic of San Francisco, but for now I'm happy in my little apartment in Oxford.
Hey, look, you've got the countryside. I don't think they have that in San Fran.
Exactly.
Well, maybe some of it, but not the way that Oxford has, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did a bit of research into your YC application, and you mentioned there was 4 people on the application. 3 people turned up to the interview, and it got me wondering, what are you thinking in that moment when they ask you those questions and they go, well, there's 4 names on here and only 3 of you turned up. How do you navigate a moment like that?
Well, fortunately for me, I had prepared the answer to that question because someone advised me that with YC, they will ask difficult questions and they will not hold back. So as an exercise, you should think about what the difficult questions they can ask you are and have a good answer prepared for them. And fortunately, I rehearsed an answer for that question because I knew it was the type of thing that if I didn't prepare for, I would be thrown off, because at the time we were going through a little bit of a conflict. The situation was that I'd put together a team very quickly. It had been a couple of months since I'd put together that team and hence put in the YC application. And one of those team members, fair enough, he said that he wanted to prioritize university work. The issue was, as a first-time founder, I made the rookie error of not setting up a vesting schedule. So the shares were already issued, but one person who was in the company for a matter of days, who hadn't really contributed anything, owned 25% of it and wasn't willing to give it up. And so we were actually in a bit of a nasty situation with this ex co-founder, which was causing significant stress. This is the first sort of like legal, anytime I've had to engage lawyers. So it wasn't nothing. It's all fine now, but at the time it was immensely stressful. And so I knew I need to have like a cool, calm, and collected answer for this. So I just prepared. I said, where's the fourth guy? And I just had an answer that, he decided to prioritize his university studies. He's not with the team anymore. And that was it. And I am so grateful that I did that, because the very first question I had when I arrived in the YC interview was, can we get started? Where's the fourth guy? And then I gave my cool, calm, and collected response, and then we continued with the interview, and they didn't think I appeared shaken by it, and it ended up going.
I've always wanted to ask someone that's gone through a YC interview, right? You see a lot of the content that comes out from people that have been accepted, people that have been declined, but it's all kind of pre-rehearsed. Did you enjoy the process? The world looks at YC like it is the best thing since sliced bread for startups, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Mm-hmm. Given their track record, it looks like there is. It looks like it is. Did you enjoy it?
YC or the application process?
Both.
So I think enjoy is a difficult term. It makes for a great story in hindsight. At the time, it was the most stressful thing I'd ever gone through, especially the application process. YC itself was a dream come true. And I don't mean to sound overly dramatic by that, but it was everything, especially someone like me who is just starting their career could want. It's mentorship from the best people. It's the best community of founders. And I don't just mean by like success. I mean just by openness and having, being a founder is a lonely journey. But from day one of my journey, I have had, 400 other people who are going through exactly what I'm going through at the same time. And so that's just completely invaluable. So the experience itself was, I definitely enjoyed, hands down. The application process, I enjoy telling the story of. I didn't enjoy at the time because it was extremely, extremely stressful, but I learned a lot from it. So that's where I think enjoyment is difficult. I enjoyed the stuff that I learned, but I also didn't sleep for a long time, and my stress levels were higher than they've ever been. So you can.
If you had to pull out one learning, and not the one that you give to everyone, the one that you kind of keep to yourself about YC, what is that one learning?
What I really appreciate about YC is that I think they are truly an investor that is not a sheep. Again, it's not said very eloquently, but with most investors, they look for signals, or they look for what else is going on, or who else is investing. They say they don't, but there are very few examples or case studies where they have proven that with their actions. Y Combinator, I believe, is truly one of those investors that doesn't just follow the herd. If they have conviction in a team or in an idea, they actually invest. And they had to, right? With me, it's not like I wasn't talking to other investors. I absolutely was. But to take a chance on, a 21-year-old with a 4-day-old idea who's still in university and not working full time takes a lot of guts on their part. That is a huge risk for them. And, when I look at my own decisions, let's say I'm hiring someone, there are so many biases that come into play. And the fact that they didn't have those biases when they made the decision to invest is something that I have a lot of respect for. And it was never about, who else is investing or who else are you talking to? Not to say that YC gets it right every time. YC, it's part of their model. They make lots of investments because they know not all of them are going to materialize. So not getting into YC isn't an indicator of a lack of success. But in terms of giving those opportunities, that's the thing where I think the VC world is so relationship driven, and that's the discriminator for people like me who don't have those networks, who haven't worked in banking for 10 years, who haven't worked at Google for 10 years. That's why there are so few people like me who are building tech companies. So the fact that they do make decisions without any of this social pressure or FOMO is something that I think is not just, has not just benefited me, but if we actually look at the ecosystem and the whole lack of representation and diversity, I think that action alone is a huge leveling factor, because they attract everyone to apply and they don't discriminate based on who you know or how you've kind of got your way in.
Mm-hmm. Given you're a woman in a male-dominated startup ecosystem, tech ecosystem, how's it affected you?
So when I first started my journey as a founder, I was of the belief that it didn't matter. I'd said that having come from doing a physics degree where I was also in the minority being a woman, having played League of Legends where I was a minority in the women. And having
Great game.
It is a great game, although the community is very toxic. I think being a woman has definitely harmed me more in League of Legends than in my actual career. But I was used to being around men, and even professionally until that point, all of the internships I'd done had either been in software engineering or finance, which are also male-dominated industries. And up till that point, I really felt like I was given the same opportunities, because I think at the lowest level of graduate recruitment, it is fairly equal. I think at university, it is fairly equal. And I think in school, it is also fairly equal. Of course, there are different biases, there are unconscious biases, but for the most part, it's not like it's not systematically oppressing women. And so when I started my company, I thought, well, I am very well equipped to write code. I'm probably more well equipped than a guy to talk to people about skincare. So that's actually an advantage. I can write code and I can have better conversations about skincare with my target customer. I think this is I think me being a woman is actually a really good thing as far as just competitive advantage in building this company. So I sort of went in with that approach. And I think that stayed my mindset until I fundraised, because that was my first experience dealing with people external to the company. Until that point, it was really just focused about me and what I'm doing. And in order to get to the stage where I fundraised, I knew, well, I need to get some traction. To get some traction, I need to build a product. To build a product, I need to write some code. And writing code, talking to users, and gaining traction had nothing to do with my gender. I felt that was completely independent, and I could succeed just as much, if not more, than an equivalent male would in my circumstances. When I say that it changed during fundraising, what I mean by that is when I started my funding round, I had very little strategy going into it. I was getting reached out to by these investors. I think the YC branding really helped with that. And I was taking that as a huge compliment that, wow, I don't have to reach out to investors. They're coming to me. Like, I must be in demand. This is going to be easy. Like, I've built a cool company. Like, everything's going to be fine. And it was not fine, and it was not easy. It got to about 200 meetings in when I just paused and I just thought, is it just me, or like all the people that have actually invested women? And I went back through my spreadsheet where I was tracking who I was talking to, and I'd already noted down, their fund name, the average check size, things like that. And I just, as an exercise, added a column for gender. And if it was a fund, it was the main person I was talking to. And of all the meetings I did, 75% of them were with male investors, which is roughly expected. There's just a lot more male investors than there are female investors. In terms of number of investors that had invested, over 80% were female. And in terms of dollars invested, so if we now account for the check size, over 90% of the dollars I'd raised were from women investors. So not only did I have an order of magnitude higher success rate when talking to female investors, they were also investing larger checks. They were investing more money into me. And at this point...
Why do you think that is?
So there's a couple of reasons. And one of my very kind male investors was actually one of the people who helped me try and make sense of these numbers. There's many parts to it. So the first was my lack of network, was sort of the underlying reason. When I was pitching, I wasn't, talking to people that I'd already engaged in the fundraising setting. Everyone I raised money from, I met for the first time during my round. And that's also something I'm incredibly proud of. And I look back on it that, wow, I was able to convince this group of people to give me this much money after one 30-minute meeting. It's something I'm immensely proud of and is a huge achievement, but it is much harder. And sometimes you'll hear investors say, we invest in lines, not dots. And I only had dots because I had just turned 22. I hadn't spent time networking with VCs. I didn't know that this would be in my career journey. So everything I was doing on a first time basis. And what that means is that there are a lot of biases that come into play. I would never say that investors are on average racist or sexist or ageist. It's nothing like that. But it's the unconscious biases that come into play when you're in a meeting. And the first thing is, and this actually isn't even an unconscious bias, I shouldn't lump it in, it's the subject matter that we're building for. We are building a beauty tech company. We're building in the skincare industry. Every single woman that I pitched to, I didn't have to talk about the market. That was an irrelevant point. They get it's massive, they get it's money. That's not one of the points of contention. I went into multiple meetings with male investors where the whole conversation was around skincare is not a market. Beauty is a market, self-care is a market, cosmetics is a market, skincare is not big enough. You can show someone all of the numbers in the world, but if someone just fundamentally has a belief about something, in the same way that I might say, I'm not interested in, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons. I can say no one's interested in Dungeons and Dragons. Why would anyone be interested? That's not true. It's just I'm not interested and I don't really care for it. It's the same thing. Someone who has zero interaction with this industry just naturally is not inclined to care about the problem, which is fair enough. This is where the representation comes into it. If most investors are male, most investors don't understand the market that we're operating in. The second problem is what we're doing hasn't been done before, which is why I'm working on it and why I think it's which is why I'm dedicating my career to this. The problem for that when it comes to talking to investors is if you don't understand the market and you don't have a case study for we are doing XYZ or we are copying, we're doing this for this region or whatever, it becomes very difficult to understand and then assess, is this going to be successful? Because there is no plan that we can copy and just execute on. So I think there were these sort of like risk factors of not understanding the market, not having an interest in the market, and then coming back to, the unconscious biases. I'm meeting all of these investors for the first time. Now, I can be as impressive and successful and have the best metrics for my company. There might be another founder as well who has all of the same things, except you've known him from your 5 years working together at Google. I would make the same decision. I would pick the person I know. And so it's just sort of these small unconscious things, or I would pick the person that I went to school with, or that I look like, or that has a similar family background to me. It's not conscious, but there's these small things that kind of build empathy. And I accept that one job as a founder, especially while pitching, is you have to try and find those common grounds. You have to try and sell it. But it is objectively harder for female founders to do that. There's also like another area to this, which is been documented. I think it was a Harvard study about the questions that female founders are asked during fundraising. And women are disproportionately asked what are called, oh gosh, my brain is blanking. But it's essentially they're asked questions that sort of put a negative slant on it. And men are asked the same question, but with a positive slant on it. So if it's regarding market size, a man would be asked, so like, this is really cool. Like, how big can this get? Whereas a woman will be asked, well, this market is so big. Like, how are you going to get market share? Which is kind of asking about the same thing, but one
same question, two different frames.
So the term is promotion questions and prevention questions, and women are disproportionately asked prevention questions, even by female investors. It's not a conscious discrimination tactic. It is just a difference in how men and women are perceived and how men and women communicate. And so this is another thing that I wasn't aware of while I was raising until I ended up doing this sort of live pitching thing. And there were 4 other companies and they were all male only companies. Everyone pitched and then there was a Q&A. And this was the first time I got to sit in on a Q&A for other companies with the same investors. And I noticed it firsthand and I was like, wow, I am being asked such different questions to the other people. And when you're pitching one-on-one, you don't know what's going on in the room next door to you with another founder and another set of investors. But seeing it on stage like that was really quite a depressing sort of punch in the face of, this isn't in my head. Like the numbers show it in my data set. 200 investors is not a small sample size. I can rationalize it, and I am now seeing it firsthand play out how different the response is to a female founder pitching versus a male founder pitching. So sorry, to summarize this very drawn out point, I don't think it's equal. I think it does matter if you're a woman raising or building a company. And there are other areas where it does impact the experience as well. Like I've had interviews with job candidates where they've said, I didn't think I'd be speaking to HR. I thought I was doing a technical interview. when both myself and my CTO have the exact same degree from the same university. If anything, mine is a fresher degree. I'm younger than him. So, we have the same qualifications. I've worked in tech, but it will be assumed that I'm HR, even though I'm the technical founder and CEO. So it's these small things that, in that case, obviously he didn't get the job, and I was not. There were many other things also wrong with that candidate, but these micro aggressions, I guess, where there are differences in how you're treated as a woman. And I'm at the viewpoint now where I don't think it does anyone favors to say, actually, it doesn't matter. Actually, we're the same. Actually, you're going to succeed regardless. If you're good enough as a woman, you'll succeed. Yes, I agree. But you have to acknowledge that it's not a level playing field. And I think that's
so given the issues, what do you think the solution is?
I think it's a broader societal problem of there not being enough women in certain fields. So I think the problem would be alleviated if there were more women on the other side of the table, if there were more female investors. The problem is, to become an investor, you normally have to have worked in a startup where you face the same problems, work in tech where you face the same problems, work in finance, all these traditionally male-dominated industries where women have the same troubles in rising for all the various reasons. A lot of it, again, is unconscious bias. And so I think it starts at the school and education level, not just telling school kids, because as I said, I don't think there is a massive imbalance in the education itself saying, women can't do STEM. I think it's the opposite. From the age of 12, there were women in STEM programs to encourage women to pursue them. There is a drop off. In my physics degree, it was 80-20, but in my high school physics class, it was about 50-50. So I definitely noticed a shift in that transition. I think we should be aiming to level that out more. But I also think having this education to school-aged people, whether that's men or women, is important, because I think it's very easy to navigate your school career, go through education and know very little about the dynamics of the real world or how things work once you leave school. And I think just by making young people aware of these biases that exist, keep encouraging young women to go into STEM subjects or into these traditionally male-dominated fields, and vice versa, encourage young men to go into traditionally female-dominated fields. But also educate young people on unconscious biases that happen, so that when they do enter the workforce, they are at least aware of these problems. And then as they rise through the ranks, they'll eventually, get power to make certain decisions. And they will hopefully at least be mindful of some of these things that otherwise it's very easy to ignore. And you only really feel it once you've experienced it on the negative side. Up till this point, you're going to be completely oblivious to it. And so I think educate people about this reality before they have to experience it firsthand, so that they can do something about it. And that starts with education.
Thank you for that. It's tough, because ultimately it's not just one solution fits all, right? You've got to go down, and it's got to be at a real grassroots level, and it's got to grow over time. So it's more of a generational solution rather than something that's going to happen in our lifetime, or it's going to happen at the end of our lifetime, and that's when the fruits are going to come of it, which sucks, to be perfectly honest, right?
But that's always how societal change happens. And there are some things now that, where it is a much more level playing field, but it's taken time to get there, and it's not overnight. But I think as long as we're having the conversation, which is also why I don't think it does women any favors to say, actually, it's the same. Actually, you're going to succeed regardless. The viewpoint I held 3 years ago about it doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, alien, whatever it is, you're going to succeed. I think that mindset or that message can be damaging to the cause. And what's interesting is I think a lot of female founders hold that. I've had conversations with many groups of female founders where sort of it's been split 50-50, and half of sort of on the viewpoint that I share, which is we need to talk about this problem. The first step to solving a problem is admitting when there's a problem. Whereas, there's also another school of thought within the female founder community that pointing out these differences makes it worse for us. We shouldn't need to have to, raise from a female only fund, or get pressed because we're women, or only be invited to a room because we're a woman. And I understand that sentiment. But I think it's happening because of these imbalances fundamentally. But yeah, it's interesting that even amongst female founders, I think there's definitely split perspectives on this issue. But at least for now, I know which side I stand on.
As we come to the end of the episode, I like to do a quick fire round. So I'm going to say a sentence or a statement, and I'd love to hear your answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's go for it.
What do you think of success? When you think of success, who comes to mind and why?
I think about my parents, and I say that because they have all the things that I value immensely, which is family, which obviously I am a part of. I value family immensely, but if I can create what they have done in the same way that, like, my family unit now, you know, my brother, my mum and dad is so strong. If I can do that, I would view that as a success. But also, I think health, you know, it's something that they've always prioritized. I think when it comes to wealth and career success, I've really seen them work their way up. When I was young, we didn't have much money. Now my parents are much wealthier than they were. And I have seen what it has taken to get there, and I've seen the sacrifices they made to do that. And I think really just seeing that journey of how through hard work, through their intelligence, through their education, they have improved their quality of life, their lifestyle, I find really inspirational. So if I am where they are when I am their age, I will consider that a success.
Do you think work-life balance is bullshit or not?
I think it's slightly bullshit because it's a question of your own priorities. Not everyone wants a work-life balance. Not everyone, like, I think work-life balance insinuates that, like, it's either or. There are parts to everyone's work that won't be enjoyable. Even with the best job in the world, there are going to be parts of it that you don't like. But I think it's about viewing a person as like a whole person, and there is a part of you that works. There is a part of you that does other things, but it's all like part of the same thing. It's not an either or.
If you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would it be and why?
So I don't have a deep, meaningful answer, but it would have to be the guys from Blink-182, which is my favorite band. I have never idolized anybody on this planet, including the astronaut, to the same extent that I idolize Tom DeLonge, Mark Hoppus, and Travis Barker. So it would,
why Blink-182?
they're just my favorite band. I think what it is when I was exposed to them, I had never viewed this carefree way of thinking. And it really got me into, this is going to sound so silly. I think Blink got me into philosophy because it made me realize there was a completely different way of viewing life, almost this like existential, like, stop taking everything so seriously. I mean, it's a lyric, like, no one should take themselves so seriously. And it just got me thinking about like these deeper questions of like, what is life? Like, why am I studying so hard? Why am I working so hard? And I love their attitude. I love their friendship. They've gone through some really, some ups and downs. I love their music, of course. I think they're excellent at what they do as far as their craft goes. Again, career matters to me. Success matters to me in whatever definition. Doesn't have to be in entrepreneurial success. And I think they've had immense success from being who they are. They've been so authentic to themselves. They didn't catch on to trends. They created the trends. I just really idolize them. It also doesn't make complete sense. I think that's another part of my personality I need to spend more time unpacking. But I just
that alter ego.
Yeah, I can't explain it. Sometimes I do think there is like another universe in which I have pursued a career being a rock star. Again, it's not too late. Maybe
Too late. Not at all. Not at all. Last one. What do you know now that you didn't know when you started? This whole journey of being a founder, growing up, moving to India, spending time there, and now where you are now.
I think it's that rejection and failure is a sign that you're moving in the right direction. It's that, you have autonomy and control to decide what you want to do, whether you want to challenge yourself, whether you want to coast in some areas and take things easier. And for me, I knew to achieve the ambitions that I had, I wanted this career path, and I love the job that I do. But on a daily basis, I feel like a punching bag, a professional punching bag, because it's from all angles. You know, you're going to constantly receive negative feedback from investors, from customers, from, you know, difficult team situations. The challenges never stop. Um, and it can be quite easy to, I think, get weighed down by all of that. But what I tell myself is that it's a choice. And for every difficult thing that I've experienced looking back, I have, again, it sounds so cliche, but the learning that has come from it has always shaped me. When I moved to India as a, you know, 13-year-old brown girl raised in Cheshire, like, you know, the thought of moving to India seemed like a horrible thing at the time. It seemed like a punishment, but it was the best thing that happened to me. And it's only really with time that I was able to see that. And so I think also maybe the other lesson there is not jumping to a conclusion about whether a situation was good or bad in the moment, but and accepting that you will never know. To the extent that there are decisions today that I'm making that seem like the right thing at the time, but also just having the humility to step back and say, this feels like the right thing. You know, I think promoting this team member to this role is the right thing for now, and this is why I'm doing it. I don't know if it's going to be the right thing long term, because with everything that in the past may have seemed good in the moment didn't always work out to be so good, and vice versa. Things that seemed like a curse ended up being some of the biggest blessings that happened. So also just sort of like realizing that your take on any given situation is going to change as things unfold, and so never taking anything too positively or negatively. It goes both ways.
Thank you for that. Ahana, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Lovely to chat with you, Viraj.